The Nibelung Saga. A German heroic epic. Part 1. Siegfried the Hero. Retold by Rudolf Herzog. Translation copyright 2023 Sami Heikkinen. Chapter 1. Siegfried as a child, how he came to Mimes to learn, killed the dragon and won the Nibelung treasure. Walking along the banks of the lower Rhine, one can observe a quiet plain rising with an old-fashioned city that looks like it has been lost in dreams. It is called Xanten and it longs for its grand past when a king reigned over it all the way to the Netherlands, when the Scandinavian Vikings fought their battles on the river Rhine, and when the king's mighty knights galloped through the meadows of the Rhine destroying enemies in wild joy and submerging them in the river. Oh, how the horns trumpeted, swords sparkled and armor clanked during those heroic times as if thunder had rolled up and down the Rhine. Once upon a time, a son was born to King Siegmund and his queen Siegelind, and when peace reigned over the land after bloody victories, he was given the name Siegfried, victory peace. Like a young tree, nurtured with tender care and love, grew the lad. Playing he learnt what must be learnt, and already as a child so clever and wise that there were few like him. Thus he did not have to sit indoors studying or follow his mother's path, but like a true pastoral boy, striving to become a gentleman, he ran in fields and forests, observing the language of animals and stories of the woods and waves. Thus his body grew strong and supple like a fine scimitar, his eyes and ears keen, his mind quick and sharp. At 10 years old, he rode even the wildest horse without saddle and bridle, surprised and jumped on its back, grabbed the manet firmly and controlled the madly running animal with strong hands. Fear, you see, was not an option for him, and courage is the sure path to victory. At the age of 12, he was stronger than all his father's courtiers and arm-bearers, and when he had reached the age of 14, he secretly rode to the tournaments of the powerful knights with his helmet closed, so that they would not know him to be Siegfried the boy and deny him access to the tournament field because of his youth. With his lance, which he had carved from a young ash tree trunk, he threw the haughty knights off their saddles so that they had to be dug out of the pieces of armor like boiled crabs from their shells. Then Siegfried went to his royal father and said, "Let me go out into the world, my lord father, somewhere where there are enemies and where I can fight for a good cause." But the king answered, "Enemies cannot be kept in check by force alone, but also by wisdom that is able to turn enemies into friends and bring peace blessings to the country. When you grow older, my son, you will thank me for this lesson." But Siegfried thought, "My father is good at speaking, one with the grey head can happily remember times when he harassed enemies with swords and spears. In the evening harpists come to the hall to sing of Siegmund the king's heroic deeds. No wonder if he is content with his former victories and encourages others to stay away from war." Now Siegfried wandered around his home, worried, not knowing where to use his increasing youthful courage. On a few stormy autumn evenings he had again snuck into the pillar hall, where King Siegmund sat on his throne surrounded by his knights, with the drinking horn going from hand to hand. The harpist sat at the foot of the throne, singing of the battles of gods and men. He told of the heroes who had destroyed robbers and dragons, brave and powerful men who with their swords had conquered a kingdom for themselves and won a beautiful princess as their spouse. He also sang an old song about the dwarf king Nibelung's golden treasures, which were locked up in a mountain guarded by the fearsome dragon Fafnir and awaited the saving hand of a hero. Then the flame of enthusiasm seized the mind of the listening boy, he could not sleep his eyes at night, but rose up, dressed and left from the city gate. The storm wind snatched his hat off his head, but he raced with the storm, then galloped across dark meadows towards the endless pitch-black forests and where thousands of nocturnal noises roared, screamed, and howled. But Siegfried laughed so loud that the forest echoed, for such a tumult pleased him. He seized a young oak, bent it and tore it from its roots. With this he killed all that came in his way, the snarling wild boar with its glistening tusks, the immense one-horned creature whose eyes flashed darkly against him, the dragon that belched red flames and poisonous green smoke from its mouth. And Siegfried shouted through the storm, "Oh, how fun, how fun!" Mist thinned, dissipating in the treetops, as the morning began to grow dim in the forest. Siegfried surveyed his surroundings. Evidently he had crossed into a foreign land, for the area was unfamiliar to him. This made Siegfried laugh merrily again, as now he could show off his prowess to the people. But as he hacked his way through the thicket, a sudden hunger began to plague him. He looked around for the tallest tree, climbed it, and scanned the horizon for any sign of human habitation. Soon his sharp eyes spotted a plume of smoke rising from a clearing in the woods, coming from a cottage beside a winding stream. Hastily, he hurried towards it. The blacksmith stood there, and Siegfried remained in amazement looking at him. This man was short-legged, strong-bodied being, with a large hump on his back and an oddly large head. The beautiful boy felt sorry that another human could be so ugly, and he cheerfully wished the dwarfish man a good morning. The blacksmith, whose arms were as strong as lifting bars, had just rolled the iron bar down to the smithy when Siegfried shouted at him. He lifted his face, covered with a bushy beard, grabbed his enormous hammer and asked, "What are you doing here?" "Hey," shouted Siegfried, "what could a hungry stomach be doing here? It craves breakfast that smells so sweet on your stove." "Keep your hands off it," said the blacksmith menacingly. "Loafers don't have to eat." "I'll show you, I'll earn my keep," chirped Siegfried. "Do you have any work for me?" The blacksmith handed him his immense hammer and pointed to an iron rod that had been set up on the anvil. "Perhaps your arms are as strong as your jaw," he said. Siegfried, enraged, raised his hammer and struck the iron rod so hard that it broke into pieces, flying through the air, and sank the anvil deep into the ground. "What children's toy is this?" shouted the powerful Siegfried. "Give me men's work." The blacksmith stared with his eyes wide open at the stern-looking boy. "Now you can kill me, young sir," he said, "for you have a weapon in your hand." Siegfried's anger had already cooled. "You may have your weapons back," he said. "I will not fight an unarmed man. Nature has also treated you, poor man, so ruthlessly that you must be shown love." The hunchback looked at him with a tender little look in his eyes and said, "Stretch out your hand to me. You can be no one else but Siegfried, the young hero whose deeds are praised by singers. Now I know that you are a true knight, you have a pure and gentle heart." "Then who are you?" asked Siegfried. "I am Mime the blacksmith," said the small man. "Stay with me as long as you like, I will teach you whatever you need." Then Siegfried remained with Mime, and he did not even notice that a year went by, and a second and third in addition. Time passed so quickly, and the master and apprentice took care not to lose a single moment of it. Siegfried had already been strong on foot, but now he became as powerful as a giant and agile as a swift deer. He learned to catch a bear with bare hands and to cut and roast meat on a fire without the help of a knife or spear. Warm blood tasted like fine red wine to him, and in addition to game he ate succulent roots and herbs that protected him from all kinds of diseases. Every day he received the most excellent instruction from Mime in the use of weapons, and his master taught him the most skillful moves and all the offensive and defensive maneuvers with which one man could defend himself against 10. In the stable was a horse named Grain, who had been one of God Wotan's steeds. Mime gave this horse as a gift to his foster son. And he also forged for the young man a helmet and armor, plus a sword that could cleave through the hardest iron as if it were butter, and which was called Barmung. How Siegfried's eyes shone now. "Father Mime," he asked, "why are you giving me so much wealth?" The blacksmith said, "Keep it all for yourself, my young hero. No other person has shown me such love as you have. Isn't it only fair then that I reward you for it?" Siegfried blushed and said, "I haven't done it in hope of a reward." Then the blacksmith spoke again. "Therefore you have earned your reward. But I know very well that the young knightly spirit of yours would not be satisfied by a reward which comes to you without fighting an effort of your own. A real man can only be delighted by the booty he has won himself. That is why I have only equipped you with weapons. Your task is to win the treasure. So pay attention to my words." And Mime, the blacksmith, told him this. Once upon a time there was a king called Nibelung who owned the world's most precious gold and jewels. My brother Fafnir and I secretly took possession of them. But when it came to dividing them between us, my brother mocked me for my ugliness and threatened my life. So I fled from that faithless creature, and here in exile I have had the time to regret my greed. But then Fafnir thought he was mightier and richer than even the gods of Valhalla, and he angered those heavenly beings, so as punishment he was transformed into a loathsome dragon. At the banks of the Rhine, where 7 mountains, Siebengebirge, stand, you can see a steep cliff side, inside of which he dwells. In his deep rocky fortress he keeps watch over his treasures, with 1,000 captive Nibelung knights at his command. And this glutton, who once fell victim to his greed for gold, now stalks the inhabitants of the region and devours his prey alive, thinking he is swallowing gold. So go forth, my son, and embark on a heroic mission to reclaim these treasures for yourself. But beware of the ring which the beast wears on its claw. Fafnir has stolen it from Nibelung, who cursed it. Bury it deep in the earth or throw it in the darkest depths of the sea. Siegfried followed the advice he had been given, and Mime dressed him in armor and belted a sword to his waist. Siegfried kissed and embraced his foster father in farewell, then he mounted his horse Grain and rode away singing into the world. This was Siegfried when, having grown to full manhood, he now hastened to his labors singing his songs. Taller than all men he was, his curls glowed with a golden red hue, as if the sun's fire had been absorbed into them. The steel blue eyes reflected a melted cheerful kindness, when everything went according to the man's mind, but they became like the threat of thunder when something went against the hero's nature. Women were enamored by his muscular physique. His arms were as strong as iron, and his powerful, sinewy thighs were ideal for horseback riding and discus throwing. When he arrived, everyone looked in amazement at the wonderful hero, and sighting him sight brought joy to their minds. Victorious like an early spring, he walked from place to place singing. He also approached the land of 7 mountains, and saw Drachenfels, Dragon's Rock, rising from the banks of the Rhine like some grand fortification. "Well, Grain my steed," he shouted with laughter, "what do you say? Shall we still go to the match today? Don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today." As an answer, the horse nodded its head towards the mountains. The forests became increasingly dense and dark. For years no human foot had stepped here. The loneliness felt ominously oppressive, and Grain walked even more cautiously, only advancing step by step. They arrived at the top of the hill. The steed shivered. The air was filled with a dense fog that obscured the sky, an oppressive poisonous gas filled lungs. Siegfried tightened his helmet and unsheathed his mighty oaken spear, which was double-edged with iron from the tip to the handle. He lowered his left hand to the handle of his splendid sword, Barmung. Calming his horse, he steered it past the rocky pathway. There lay the beast, 100 feet long. Its head was like a crocodile's, its legs had claws like a lion's, and its fur-covered tail resembled a terrifying serpent. It lay there, fast asleep. "Hey!" shouted Siegfried, but he wished he could take back his words, for the sound of his voice awoke the dragon and it directed its protruding eyes to the knight, opening its mouth and releasing a terrible laugh. The knight became angry, recognizing the haughty gaze very well. "Keep your mouth shut, creature," he shouted sternly. "Your breath reeks, wait, I'll shut it up right away." Bending his arms behind him, he rode towards the beast, and the spear pierced through the dragon's mouth so that only the shaft remained swaying outside. The monster rose a bit, vomited the spear back and spat it at Siegfried's protective shield with such force that the horse reared up on its hind legs, in danger of toppling over. But Siegfried's strong hand controlled it. Now the dragon attacked. Its roar made the rocks quake and its fiery breath threatened to kill the knight. Avoiding its flames, Siegfried now rode behind the beast's back. But then the dragon's tail rose up to strike. Clinging onto Grain like a bird, Siegfried dodged the blows left and right. He seized Barmung from his scabbard, quickly crouching low, and the steel sliced through the air, severing the dragon's tail so that it crashed down onto the rocks. The dragon jumped up with a shout, striking the stirrup with its paw, knocking Siegfried's horse off its back and down to the ground. "I will avenge that, you glutton," shouted the hero, lunging towards the beast. But the armor plates melted in the blaze and the armor clattered to the ground. "This is much more enjoyable," chuckled Siegfried dully and spun his sword like a wheel. Sweat dripped down his body, he felt his arms weakening and the monster was still ahead of him. Then Siegfried noticed a ring on its claws, the spoils stolen from the Nibelung king. With his last strength, he knelt down, then suddenly leaped onto the creature's throat and with his blade cut off its raised paw. Its claws and the ring landed on the rocky terrain. Once more, the beast howled when it saw its doom. Then it fell to the ground, giving up its life. The hero stood leaning on the handle of his sword. His throat felt dry, he had to moisten it or else he would perish from thirst. He bent down to drink the blood of a dead beast with his hand. When he raised his hand again, it was covered as if it were wrapped in leather. Understanding the miracle that had happened, he took off his clothes and bathed his body in the blood, thus making himself invulnerable to both blows and stabs. Only a small gap remained between his shoulders, which remained vulnerable to weapons. A leaf from a linden tree, carried by the wind from the forest, fell into the bath and got stuck on the hero's back. Clad again, with his noble sword Barmung in hand, the hero stepped towards the entrance of the rocky castle. His foot caught on one of the claws sticking out, and upon seeing one of them with a sparkling ring, he pulled it out and laughed as he put it on his finger. "Open up!" he shouted, striking the iron gate with his sword. And at the same moment, the gate opened, and a shower of sword strikes fell towards the hero. Without his new iron armor, he would have been a goner. The blows struck him like hail, but he could not see who was attacking him, to whom he could repay the favor. He reached out with both hands blindly and suddenly felt a beard in his grip, as if a person was hanging from it. He now beat this invisible being against the stone door until it let out a cry begging for mercy. "Show yourself!" shouted Siegfried. "Or else I'll smack you right in the face without hesitation." At that moment, a mist seemed to pour at the feet of the hero. The beard that he held in his hand wriggled, revealing a valiant dwarf wearing a suit of armor. "Who are you?" Siegfried asked. "What made you invisible?" The dwarf groaned. "I am Alberich, the leader of the Nibelung knights. Fafnir has forced us to be his vassals, and in attacking you I was only fulfilling my duty. So consider my situation if you are a knight yourself. As a reward, I offer you a cloak of mist, which gives its user invisibility. Go, and serve me faithfully with your knights, I shall treat you accordingly," said Siegfried. "You may swear without fear, for I have already freed you from your oppressor." Alberich knelt down and offered him the misty veil. Then, on behalf of himself and his people, he acknowledged Siegfried as his lord. At this, 1,000 knights rushed forward and, laying down their shields and swords, they joyfully swore loyalty to their savior. Then Alberich escorted Siegfried through the rocky castle, showing him the treasures of the Nibelung, piles of gold and jewels that required hundreds of carts to transport. Ah, how joyfully rang out Siegfried's laughter now! Chapter 2. How Siegfried pierced through the magic flames to Brunhild, betrothed her, conquered Iceland for her and left in despair from her side. For a whole week, Siegfried had been resting in the castle of the Dragon Mountain, and he began to feel that it was an unbearable amount of time. His young mind yearned for new heroic deeds. He thought that rest and comfort belonged only to the elderly who had already accomplished a distinguished life. Therefore, he summoned the leader of the Knights of the Nibelung, Alberich, to consult with the experienced man. "The world is full of pain and strife," said Siegfried, "and it awaits its savior. But here I am lying, enjoying my wealth and wasting my time. The life of an idle man is not suited to my nature. Tell me of some noble adventure that I can undertake, Alberich my friend." Then the belligerent dwarf replied, "Take us with you, Lord, and we will conquer the world for you." But Siegfried shook his curls. "Wouldn't that be a worthy feat," he said, "if I let others fight on my behalf and put a victory wreath earned by strangers on my helmet? First I want to earn a famous name for myself before leading and guiding others. So, tell me of a task so difficult that no one else can do it. I want to either complete it or fall with honor." Alberich stayed silent for a long time. Then he raised his helmet-covered head and looked the hero deep in the eyes. "When you seized me and brutally attacked my beard," he began to speak, "and my body is still covered in bruises from the beating I received when you slammed me into the door. But you have saved me from the terrible slavery of Fafnir and treated me chivalrous, so I would be sorry if you were to embark on a dangerous adventure." "What do you mean?" asked Siegfried. "If honor and glory can be won, then no danger should frighten us. It is not becoming of a man to spare himself." "Noble young lord," spoke Alberich now, "I will tell you all about it in detail, for I admire you, and would not gladly give this lovely booty to anyone else but you. I speak of the most beautiful woman that ever came from heaven to earth." "Where is she and what is her name?" Siegfried rushed to ask. "Her name is Brunhild," said the dwarf, "and she belonged to the Valkyries, the powerful female warriors who rode their horses to take the fallen heroes of battle to Valhalla with the gods. As punishment for her disobedience when she defied divine orders to protect a dying hero that pleased her, she was imprisoned on an isolated mountain by an enchanted sleep. The mountain is surrounded by a blazing lake of fire, and only the brave knight who fearlessly rides to her side can awaken her and win her as his bride. How sparkled Siegfried's eyes, how proudly his chest expanded. Anxiously he wanted to set off right away. "What road do you take to get there, Alberich?" she inquired. "I will ride there today on my horse." "Hasn't Grain been a steed of the Valkyries?" asked the dwarf. "If so, it knows the way." Now Siegfried bid farewell to the 1,000 knights and commanded Alberich to guard his treasures, and he summoned Grain to him. His sword Barmung was already hung at his belt, and he kept his misty cloak in a leather pouch. "Yes," said the hero, and his noble steed pricked up his ears. "Grain, sweet one, can you find the way to Brunhild's rock, where your sister's stables are? Take me there, Grain, and we will free them and the fairest maiden of all." Then the horse neighed in joy, frolicking around its master. But he quickly leapt onto his steed and had disappeared from sight before the watchers recovered from their amazement. He galloped forward like a gust of wind. Siegfried's curls fluttered around his temples, and joyfully he struck his hands against his thighs. Quickly he traveled across mountains and forests, swimming over rivers and lakes, leaping over all other obstacles. All day and night he kept going, and when the morning dawned he arrived at the foot of a towering mountain that seemed to be ablaze with fire, flickering from its roots to its peak. The horse stopped, trembling in its hooves. And Siegfried donned the misty cloak that protected him and Grain from the flames, grabbed his sword, spurred on Grain, and rode headlong into the fire. With powerful blows he cleared himself a path through the burning thicket. Through the man-high rosebushes he pressed onward, and though they threatened to overwhelm him, his courage and strength did not fail, but with tireless zeal his sword cut through the burning bushes, throwing sparks in every direction. "Upwards, Grain!" shouted the hero. "Strike hard, Barmung! Oh, my sword, strike true!" And with mighty leaps the steed labored and clambered ever upwards through the crackling and roaring blaze. And Barmung's blade hummed and flashed, cleaving thin trunks as if they were straw, keeping the way open so that the blazing thicket could not smother the warrior. The peak of the mountain was reached. Siegfried pushed open the mighty gate with the haft of his sword. Then from all sides there came long peals of thunder, and when the last echoes had died away, the flames were extinguished and the forest flourished in the golden light of morning. Siegfried removed the misty veil. His face glowed and veins bulged like cords on his forehead. "It wasn't easy, by God," he panted, shook out his curls, and jumped off the horse's back. He knelt beside Grain, looking at the rising sun, and thanked God for his evident protection. Then he grabbed the reins of the Grain and stepped through the gate. Surrounded by walls, on a field lay a large woman, shackled to an iron bed, with armor and a helmet on, eyes shut like in a dream. Quietly, Siegfried approached and bowed to the reclining figure. He had never seen a more beautiful being. She was like a war goddess, majestic in structure, lovely of face, and noble as a noble princess. Her dark curls framed her cheeks and, thinning out, enticed her full, rosy lips. Carefully, Siegfried touched his sword and Barmung broke the iron fetters as if they were only ropes. Then the heroic maiden awoke from her sleep, and Siegfried bowed down and kissed her gently on the lips. The damsel looked at him with wide eyes. They were as dark as his deep black curls, sleep vanished from them and there was life and fire in them. "Who might you be, hero?" the lips spoke. "And where do you come from?" The hero answered, still bowed over her. "I am Siegfried, son of Siemund, born from the lower Rhine-Zanten. What made you, O Siegfried, take on this daring task?" "The hope to be able to rescue you, O Brunhild, and win you for myself." The girl rose from her bed with her strong arms. From the open gate she could see all the way down to the foot of the mountain. "The fire has faded," she said quietly, taking a deep breath. "And with it, the terrible enchantment has lost its power." She jumped up, her armor clanged, as she straightened her arms and body. "I'm free! Free!" Siegfried stood by her side, admiring her strong stature and her beauty, not knowing exactly what to say. Then the maiden turned her head, noticed his admiring gaze and his majestic appearance, and she blushed fiercely. "Don't look at me like that, oh my hero," she said. "You are so lovely, Brunhild!" exclaimed Siegfried. "Only my husband has the right to look at me like that," said Brunhild. "And there is no man on earth strong enough to defeat me and take me for his own." "Then you must stand up for yourself." laughed Siegfried, approaching her and enclosing her in his arms so that the maiden could not move. But anger flashed in Brunhild's eyes and her cheeks flushed purple. "Let me go," she spoke with difficulty, "or you may yet regret your boldness." "I've never felt fear," the hero laughed and kissed the angry maiden on the lips. "You rascal," groaned Brunhild, but now she was laughing too. "See," said Siegfried, "it's not so difficult. Kiss me too." Thinking that Siegfried had already released his grip, Brunhild suddenly gave him a push to throw him to the ground. But now Siegfried wrapped her so tightly in his embrace that the maiden's armor bent and her breath was taken away. "Was that what your kiss was like, you wild creature?" "I can certainly kiss you in my own way, if that pleases you more," said Siegfried now. Then Brunhild, conquered the hero's strength and mischievous playfulness, raised her head and kissed him. Immediately, the hero released her and bent his knees, showing her knightly respect. Brunhild's defiance faded from her gaze and it turned gentle and womanly as she caressed Siegfried's curls. "My hero," she said, breathing deeply, "my savior and redeemer. I beg you for a better thank you from you, Brunhild. What better could you wish for than my friendship?" Siegfried jumped to his feet and exclaimed. "You yourself? Be my bride?" Brunhild thought for a long time, gazing into the distance. Then she spoke. "Far in the North Sea there is an island. Like a strong fortress it rises from the midst of the rolling waves. Volcanoes surround it like a ring, and there are hot streams that roar and merge with the black-blue waves. Iceland is its name, that ever unconquered island of hell, and it belonged to me until my angry god-father sentenced me to be shackled and cast into the flames. In my absence, it was taken from me. Would you like to have me as your wife, Siegfried? Where is your bridal gift? I'll state what I wish, and if you fulfill my conditions, I'll fulfill your wish. Conquer Iceland back for me. Restore me to my throne. Only as a queen can I be yours, but not as a servant." Thus spoke the noble woman, and inspired by her eloquent words Siegfried vowed to fulfill her request, and taking the ring of Nibelung from his finger he betrothed Brunhild as his bride. But that ring was followed by the curse that Mime had spoken of when Siegfried left to slay the dragon, the Nibelung curse, which could keep the owner of the ring in bondage to arrogance and insatiable desires. In placing the ring on Brunhild's finger, Siegfried had forgotten Mime's warning. In the stable was a horse which Brunhild had used as a Valkyrie. And Grain stood by its side, gently licking its neck. "Oh, my good friend," Siegfried shouted, "have you already found your friend? Well then, if we must set out on our journey again right away, you don't have to part. Are you all right with that?" The horses whinnied in response contentedly, and patiently allowed themselves to be bridled and saddled. Then Siegfried lifted Brunhild with his strong arms onto the saddle, so that the heroine secretly rejoiced at his strength. He himself leapt onto Grain's back, surveyed the sun's position in the sky and studied the winds, and then set off riding down the mountain with Brunhild. When they reached the plain, they let their horses continue on at a full gallop, and spurred them forward like hunting hawks pursuing their prey. As the stars rose in the sky, Siegfried's keen eye searched among them for the North Star and, using it as their guide, they journeyed north. The closer they drew to the sea, the fresher and stronger Siegfried's song became. Then they rode for many days from the Rhine to the mouth of the Weser, and one morning, the sea accompanied Siegfried's voice with a mighty roar from behind the sandy cliffs. They found a suitable boat for their sea voyage, and Siegfried offered the sailor a wide golden bracelet as compensation for the journey, vowing with an oath of a knight that he would give him a shield filled with gold coins if he took him, Brunhild and the horses to Iceland as soon as possible. Then the sailor hoisted his brown sails and Siegfried took hold of the rudder. The horses stood tethered by the mast and Brunhild sat at the prow, surveying the turbulent sea and giving directions to the helmsman. Oh, how the storm hit the sails and carried the ship through the waves, so that it disappeared into the foam. But Siegfried's hand held the rudder firmly, and even if the ship creaked and the mast bent with the sails being torn, the helmsman did not release his grip, but helped the ship cross the troughs with his oar, as if riding over fences and ditches. The storm roared fiercely, and Siegfried shouted back, his curls dancing around his head like a glowing sunshine. "Hooray, hooray, how fun it is to live!" Then Brunhild cast a gaze over her shoulder at the hero, who seemed to her the most pleasing of all men and suitable intermediary for her own bottomless ambition. Night and day the storm raged, and Siegfried's clear laughter echoed from the stern. But one morning, they could see from the mainsail that they were approaching Iceland. That's when Siegfried's song stopped, and he reached for his sword. They anchored at the harbor, and armed men hastened to prevent them from disembarking. But Siegfried seized the rope he intended to use to tie up the ship and leapt mightily into their midst, causing them to scatter in confusion and think that the devil himself had flown down on their necks. The sailor then threw the gangplank onto the shore, and Siegfried carried Brunhild off the ship, then also led the restive horses to the beach. Armed and ready, they rode towards the king's castle, where the people assembled on the walls. "Let the king come here!" Siegfried shouted commandingly. And now a messenger was dispatched to take this marvelous message to the king. The black armor-clad king rode to the gate of the castle on his black war-horse. "The brazen stranger," he spoke threateningly, "what language do you dare to use? I will feed your body to the fishes." Siegfried's veins bulged, but he still held back his emotions. "Descend to the ground," he commanded imperiously, "you are just an usurper, and you must approach your queen humbly on foot. Brunhild has returned to her land. Descend to the ground, I say once more, remove your crown and offer it to the queen at her stirrup." The king, in a fit of rage, closed his visored helmet and charged at Siegfried with his horse, wielding an immense lance. With his sword drawn, Siegfried urged Grain to charge by pressing its flanks with his knees, brandished his shining sword, and struck the attacker's hand, causing the lance to fall with a forceful upright blow. Straining with all his strength, the king managed to turn his horse and tried to escape to the safety of the castle gate. But Grain followed, their stirrups clanging together. Releasing the reins, Siegfried tightened his knees against Grain's flanks, reached out to grab the fleeing king, trapping him in his grip like shackles, and pulled him from the saddle as the horses galloped. He then sent the king tumbling to the feet of Brunhild, where he lay, having surrendered his life. "I already told you," shouted the enraged hero, "that you must approach your queen on foot." He jumped off the horse, grabbed the crown from the ground and placed it in Brunhild's curls. Then he turned towards the castle wall and shouted to the people. "Here you see your queen, who has returned to take stock of your loyalty. Now hurry and show her humble respect if you want to partake of her grace." Then they came in a long procession with their banners and musicians, knelt down, and offered from the gold cups bread and salt, from the gold goblet a cup of welcome. Brunhild sat proudly and regally on her horse, a crown upon her head. Her movements were of royalty as she now took bread and salt, moistening her lips with wine. Smiling kindly, she extended the goblet to Siegfried, who took it laughing and emptied it to the last drop. The people expressed their admiration for the strong and cheerful hero with passionate acclamation. Brunhild walked boldly into the royal castle, and with a merry glance Siegfried went beside her. During the week, Brunhild had been organizing the affairs of the kingdom and Siegfried had been in good spirits letting her work in peace. But now he stepped before Brunhild, kissed her beautiful hands and inquired when the wedding would be held. Brunhild lowered her eyes to the ground. Her gaze fell upon the ring of Nibelung, which sparkled in her hand. "My hero," she began to speak, "this kingdom is quite small and too insignificant for our heroic nature. But your father Siemund still lives and may rule for a long time yet. I hope that it may happen through God's mercy," said Siegfried. "So then," continued Brunhild, "take my best ships, my best knights and my arms-bearers, sail to Norway and Denmark, conquer those lands and establish a great northern kingdom for yourself." Siegfried looked at her and then smiled. "You want to question my character," he said. "I am not a Viking who plunders at sea, but a knight. And Norway and Denmark live peacefully with us. So tell me, when will we have the wedding?" "When you return as the crowned king of Norway and Denmark," Brunhild answered. Then the hero noticed that the maiden's mind had become proud, and he tried to bring back to life the queen's tenderness of a loving woman. "Brunhild," he said, "remember that we are betrothed. I do not want to see a manly power seeker standing beside me, but a sweet companion who will let me rest my head on her passionate bosom. Oh, let me sing to you of my love after wild war songs, and sing to me of your love so that I know what treasure I am fighting for in my battles, and then I will wield Balmung with even greater strength." Brunhild answered mockingly, laughing. "My bosom is not a refuge for the weary and weak. The queen can only become as the spouse of a king. Let your sword speak for you, not your words," she spoke. Siegfried furrowed his brow. Standing tall he faced Brunhild, his eyes flashing. Then he turned and stepped onto the shore. There was still the sailor who had brought them waiting for a favorable wind. "Let's set off," said Siegfried, "I'll take care of the rudder." At the castle wall stood Brunhild, proud in her beauty and in her purple and gold garments. Like a magnificent midnight sun, she shone surrounded by her courtiers. She raised her hand. "Siegfried," she cried out with regal self-assurance, "Siegfried, I await your return." Chapter 3. How Siegfried came to Worms and helped King Gunther defeat the kings of Denmark and Germany. Siegfried had traversed the dark northern sea and the blue southern sea. On the Italian sunny coasts, he fought against the Saracens and chased them bleeding back to their African wildernesses. Across the icy world of the Alps, he had ridden, conquering giants that poured down avalanches from the mountains. Everywhere where people groaned in anguish, his sword shone, both on land and sea. But although his fame grew and news of his deeds circulated around the world, his heart remained without joy ever since he had been betrayed by a woman's deceit, ever since Brunhild had broken her promise to him. Then, after years had passed, he returned to the German court and arrived in the Rhine region with his knights and arms-bearers. As he rode along the banks of that beloved stream, he felt a homesickness take over his mind and he thought to himself, "Oh, if only I could rest and lean my head on my beloved pillow. It saddens me that I can't do that. Where is my home? From Xanten to the Low Countries, my father rules, and here on the Rhine, the Burgundian princes reign. But I don't want to live anywhere else but near the Rhine." He still rode on, weighing various plans in his mind. With these thoughts he came to Worms, where the Burgundian king Gunther resided with his brothers Gernot and Giselher. Seeing this magnificent landscape, his heart beat warmly, and a feeling of home filled his mind. Then he decided to approach Gunther and buy a part of his land, offering in exchange a ship full of gold, or if the king did not agree to the trade, to challenge him and his men to a fair duel for life and property. King Gunther sat in his throne room. He was a large, almost Siegfried-sized man, and he had few equals in the use of weapons. But his face showed an implacable pride and a passionate desire for power. His brother Gernot was a powerful warrior, chivalrous and valiant man. The youngest brother Giselher was still almost a child, fair-haired, blue-eyed youth, whose heart was filled with dreamy, enthusiastic joy of life. Around the throne sat or stood the mighty of the land. The most noteworthy of these was Hagen von Tranya, the uncle of the Burgundian rulers, a lean, lanky man with dark black hair and a face. He had only one eye left, but this one scanned the world with a sharp piercing gaze from behind thick eyebrows. He had lost his other eye when, as a hostage in the land of the Huns, he had tried to attack his partner Walther on his return journey. As the most astute advisor, he was the man closest to the throne, and he held the power and might of lords above all. As loyal as he was to his rulers, he was as terrifying to his enemies. Notable persons still included Hagen's brother Dankwart, a daring man who blindly carried out whatever his brother desired. Hagen's nephew, Lord Ortwein of Metz, a hot-tempered, headstrong man whose sword was as quick as his tongue, Lord Volker of Alzey, who lured fiery or gentle tunes from his fiddle as tirelessly and cheerfully as he brandished his sword, the chief cook, Knight Rumold, Knight Hunold, who took care of the drinks, Knight Sindold, the heralds, and many more. The king raised his head, remaining unsatisfied as he listened. Then he spoke. "What noise is coming from the shore? Doesn't the crowd know they must be quiet while the rulers and their council have a meeting? Let a messenger go to find out the reason for the disturbance." Then the knight Sindold hastened to fulfill the command, and he quickly returned. "King Gunther," he spoke quickly, "there is an unknown hero who has arrived here with his knights and arms-bearers, and the people are gathering near and far to admire this handsome rider and the valuable weapons and costumes of his companions. What does it concern me about weapons and attire?" Gunther raged. "I want to know the name." Sindold had to admit that it was unknown to him, and that nobody else knew it either. Then Gunther rose from his throne and quickly went to the window, and his brother and counselors followed him. But however they looked, they couldn't see any signs that would allow them to recognize the knight, and Gunther was quite angry. "Let me say a few words," finally spoke Hagen. "On my long journeys, I have come to know all the knights of the Christians and pagans, and those whom I have not seen with my own eyes, I have at least heard spoken of. Based on stature, strength, and exceptional bearing, this knight can be none other than the mighty Siegfried of Xanten." At that moment, everyone was silent, amazed, and each one remembered the renowned deeds of that hero. Finally, Gunther spoke. What brought him here, and should we accept him as a friend or an enemy? I, for my part, would advise showing him kindness, said the cunning Hagen. If we win his friendship, he could bring us many advantages, for his power and wealth are boundless. Just remember that he has slain the dragon and thus gained possession of the Nibelungs' limitless treasures. I fear greatly, replied Gunther, that he does not value our friendship too much, when he arrives in our country so proudly without announcing himself. Hagen smiled. I know how to tame such hawks, he said. Siegfried, the most powerful man in the world, has a heart as gentle and tender as a boy's when he is not in the grip of anger. Let us use this advantage wisely and cautiously. Look how gracefully he jumps off his horse. Let us go to the door of the hall and greet him as a noble guest. Gunther reluctantly agreed to follow the advice, but his intelligence won over his pride, and with open arms he went to meet the stranger all the way to the arched entrance of the pillar hall. Welcome to Burgundy, Siegfried the Hero, he said. Make yourselves at home in our castle, and after you have rested and refreshed yourself with food and drink, come join us and tell us what happy thing we must thank for having the honor of seeing such a distinguished guest among us. You are King Gunther, said Siegfried seriously. And since you know who I am, you can understand that it would not be right for me to take advantage of your kind offer which you might later regret. What could then change our minds to be unkind to you? Exclaimed Gunther in astonishment. Gunther, King of Germany, answered Siegfried, it depends on you how our relationship turns out. Your kingdom is so large that you probably don't know its borders exactly, let alone be able to defend them. The heathen Huns are already preparing for a new campaign in the east, and in the north the battle-ready Danish king and his brother, the king of the Germans, have begun their preparations. How do you intend to face them alone? Homesickness has brought me back to the Rhine region, and, if I don't want to die of longing, I must stay here. If you grant me part of your land, I offer you in return as much gold as you want and, in addition, my friendship and my sword to protect you against all enemies who threaten you. Then he fell silent. In astonishment, the audience stood in silence. Then shouted the hasty-tongued Lord Ortwein of Metz. What, is that your only offer? When you come as merchants, you should of course be able to offer something to bargain with. Siegfried paid no attention to the arrogant speaker. But when the king didn't scold his courtier, anger rose in Siegfried's face. I do have alternative suggestion, he said with a firm voice. If you would rather fight me over those lands than make deals, then I welcome every single one of you to duel me, either on horseback or on foot, with swords or spears. Mr. Ortwein's sword flew out of its sheath. Do you think you're talking to cowards? He snapped. Come here if you so wish. Lord Ortwein, shouted Hagen, who has given you permission to draw your sword before the king has given the command? The king's brothers Gernot and Giselher hurried to ensure that the sword was returned to its sheath, but Hagen whispered to his king. Try to stall so we can get this solved to our advantage. A rosy smile was visible on King Gunther's lips as he now approached Siegfried, extending both of his hands to him. You are dear to me, Siegfried the Hero, he spoke, and your friendship may mean more to me than half my kingdom. But you must understand how suddenly and unexpectedly this proposal came to us, and trusting in your chivalrous nature, we dare to hope that you will grant us time to consider it calmly and peacefully. So be here as in your own home, and we should surely come to an agreement in the coming days. At that moment, the king gestured to Hunold, the cupbearer, who brought a bejeweled buffalo horn plated with gold and filled with wine from the Rhine. The king toasted Siegfried, expressing his wish for peace and friendship. Siegfried, feeling pleased, courteously bowed and took the horn, draining it in hearty sips. The highly anticipated Rhine wine lifted his spirits and put him in a joyful and content mood. Now Rumold, the head chef, arrived at the door calling for dinner. In good spirits, the princes and lords went to the dining room, and Siegfried sat next to Gunther on a high-honored seat, and after years, his heart was filled with joy and cheerfulness again. But that night, Hagen sat for a long time with his lord Gunther, counseling him on how they could profit from Siegfried's sword and treasures without paying for them. He must see Kriemhild, your sweet sister, said Hagen at last, rising from his seat, as morning was approaching. Love tames and enslaves a man. Thus spoke the stern Hagen, who himself had remained unmarried, as had his lord Gunther. From then on, Hagen was always by Siegfried's side. He boasted of the hero's strength, As he came to the tournament on horseback as brilliant as a sun god and threw the Burgundian knights from the saddle, lightly like feather pillows. He spoke regretfully about the fact that Siegfried had no descendants who, as inheritors of his name and fitness, would bring happiness and joy to mankind. You, the hero, should marry a princess, Hagen said. One who would be graciously noble and more beautiful than all other maidens under the sun, and whose constant tender care would be to please you and fill your heart with happiness. But where could one find a maiden who deserves to be wed to Siegfried? Yes, I do know of one, only one, but surely King Gunther and his brothers would rather give away their whole kingdom than lose this precious jewel, their own sister. What is his name? Asked Siegfried. Kriemhild is her name, said Hagen, and she is graceful and slender-limbed, and her blue eyes sparkle like sunshine. When she lets her fair tresses flow free, it seems as if she were wearing a mantle of pure sunlight. It billows down to her shapely feet, enviously veiling her beautiful body. I would very much like to see her, if she is truly so lovely, said Siegfried, riding on his path with a dreamy mind. In his mind appeared an image of the damsel he had rescued from the midst of magic spells and who wore the engagement ring he had given her, the woman to whom he had won back the kingdom behind the raging waves, and who had responded to his passionate love with haughty pride. He thought of proud, manly Brunhild. Then he felt a passionate longing for the real and true tenderness. And now he often urged Hagen. Please, tell me again about Kriemhild. Again, the princes and lords sat in the pillared hall, listening to Sir Volker, the talented minstrel, and drinking wine from golden goblets. And Volker's fiddle told charmingly of love and chivalrous deeds, and Siegfried was consumed by tender and at the same time fiery emotions. King Gunther, he said softly, his breath catching, you have a sister named Kriemhild. Gunther looked down sheepishly at his goblet. He feared a premature proposal, as the guest had not yet relinquished his original land acquisition ambitions. She is still almost a child, he replied shyly, although in terms of his appearance and gracefulness, she has developed into a full-blown young maiden. Give me an opportunity to show her my respect, asked Siegfried. I haven't seen her yet. And Gunther answered. She is shy and only appears in the presence of men when a victorious hero is to be crowned with a laurel wreath. Oh, Siegfried cried out eagerly, then the victor will soon be found, I have rested long enough. Gunther, the king, grew pale at Siegfried's intense excitement. He was about to call for Hagen's help, but then he heard sounds from the hallway and a servant hurried to investigate the cause. My lord king, he cried out upon returning, very disturbed, the king of Denmark, Ludgast, and the king of Saxony, Ludiger, have sent envoys, and they request an audience with you. This means war, said Hagen. Let them deliver their message, said King Gunther, and his hands clenched the sides of the throne. Then the servant brought in the envoys, and upon Gunther's signal, they began to present their case. Our lords and kings Ludgast and Ludiger have sent us to deliver the message that they are dissatisfied with the current borders between our lands. They have declared war on you and plan to attack with an army of 300,000 men, seeking to conquer your castles and cities. They demand that you quickly request peace, meet their demands concerning the borders, and pay war tribute. This message is being delivered to you, King Gunther, and your brothers, by kings Ludgast and Ludiger. And again, Gunther gestured for the envoys to be taken away to receive food and drink. What do we have to do? He asked after the messengers had left and directed his gaze towards Hagen. Hagen replied fiercely. We are not prepared for war and cannot gather more than a few thousand men. What would they mean in the face of such a terrifying superiority? Should we then comply with their demands? Gunther asked, gnawing his lips in fury. And the knights could hardly breathe, not understanding how to overcome this menacing danger. Then Siegfried opened his mouth and happily laughed, breaking the oppressive silence. My lord King Gunther, he shouted, I just promised you I would bring a victorious hero here. Now is the chance. Let me take these gentlemen with me, plus 1,000 men, and I will make sure that neither the Danes nor the Germans dare to return here. So, let's get to work. Call the envoys to the hall. I want my victory wreath. How about me? Shouted King Gunther. What shall I do in the meantime? You rule the land and make sure that everyone lives safely under your protection. Hagen rushed to the king and urged him to give his consent. Gunther then ordered the envoys to be brought back to the hall. Majestically the king sat on his throne of power, and he spoke proudly. Hasten quickly back to your homes, and when your lord asks why you did not spare your horses, reply to them, because the Burgundians were on our heels. Good luck on your journey. The messengers hastened their journey home. But before departing, Siegfried and the Burgundian kings meticulously examined their armor and helmets, their saddles and reins, and had their horses re-shod. Strong carts were laden with provisions and barrels of robust wine. And before the week's end, Siegfried set out on a war campaign, joined by Gernot, Hagen, and the other Burgundian knights, with the fiery-spirited minstrel, Herr Volker, as their banner-bearer. Their journey through Hesse was quick, leading them into Saxony. But King Ludeger had already joined forces with his brother Ludgast, so on the border of Denmark, they faced nearly 40,000 men. Let us organize our army of 1,000 men, Siegfried said darkly to Hagen, and appoint a valiant warrior to lead every 100, as an example of martial fervor. We'll leave the provisions behind. If we fall in battle, we won't need food anymore. But if we triumph, we can just as easily make do with the enemy's supplies. As for me, I'm going out on a reconnaissance mission now. Cautiously, Grain started to run across the field. In the distance, the vast camp of the enemy could be seen. As he came closer, Siegfried saw a rider at the guard post with golden bridles on his horse. This was King Ludgast of Denmark. Siegfried brandished his lance for the charge. But the Dane had already spotted him and lifted his own lance and shield. The horses clashed against each other, causing clumps of earth to fly in all directions. The fierce foes collided with such velocity that the shafts shattered against the shields, down to the hilt. Without exchanging words, both fighters grabbed their swords. But before Siegfried could draw Barmung from its scabbard, the giant Dane had already landed a mighty blow on his helmet, nearly rendering him unconscious. Nevertheless, Siegfried managed to unsheath his sword, and a solitary battle ensued between the two, as if two ghostly apparitions were clashing against each other. No words were spoken. The only sounds were the clatter of horses' hooves, the clanging of armor, and the swishing of swords. With one single blow, Siegfried split King Ludgast's shield. The king grabbed the pieces and smashed them against Siegfried's head. But fueled by his wrath, the hero retaliated with another powerful strike. The Danish king's armor was shattered into pieces. Grasping his battle axe, he rained down relentless blows on Siegfried. However, the young hero countered with another strike, sending Ludgast tumbling off his horse, badly injured. The king then yielded, and Siegfried captured him with chivalry and brought him to the Burgundian camp. How the knights and soldiers praised Siegfried the hero, and how their bravery grew despite facing 40,000 enemies. The early morning sun had barely risen above the horizon when the battlefield began to stir with activity. As far as the eye could reach, there were rows of troops, both cavalry and infantry, marching in formation. "Don't be afraid," Siegfried shouted to his battle companions. "The thickly growing grain is easiest to harvest." He ordered Volker, the minstrel, to unfurl the war banner. "Follow me!" Siegfried cried out, spurring Grain and plunging into the enemy formation. Standing tall on his stirrups and wielding powerful blows on both sides, he carved a path through the enemy line and created a way for their troops to advance to the center. Volker followed with the banner, whistling love songs as he swung his sword with might. Following their example, Gernot also pushed into the enemy ranks, while Hagen, his single eye blazing with fire, wreaked havoc with his war hammer. Dankwart, driven by blind fury, wielded his sword without regard for his life. Lord Ortwine of Metz added curses to each strike, and the Lords Sindold, Hunold, and Rumold clenched their teeth and wielded their swords with full force. How proudly Grain carried his master on his back. Siegfried had managed to break through the enemy lines and, laughing, he turned his horse, sword covered in blood, carved a path back and leaving behind dead and dying enemies groaning with pain. Upon reaching the end of the path, he turned his horse once more. Then the king of the Saxons, Ludeger, attacked him with such fury that Grain stumbled and threw Siegfried to the ground. But Grain was immediately back on his feet and Siegfried back in the saddle, and, angry about the fall he had taken, the hero delivered twice as brutal blows. "Are you the devil yourself?" shouted Ludeger, desperately defending himself. And Siegfried shouted back, "If you smell the stench of death, it's from your own groans of pain." And with a strike, he shattered the king's helmet and armor. Then Ludiger, exhausted, surrendered to Siegfried's power. Siegfried took him in his arms and displayed the prisoner to the Saxon and Danish armies. Now a wild rout ensued. The Burgundians chased the fleeing enemy, taking as much loot and captives as they could. The best rider was sent to Worms to bring news of the victory to King Gunther. As the harbinger approached the royal castle, sweet Kriemhild stood at her window. "Victory!" shouted the rider, waving his helmet to her. Kriemhild bowed deeply out the window. "Who was the bravest of them all, harbinger?" "Siegfried, Siegfried," echoed back to her. Then Kriemhild felt a glowing blush spread over her face, for she had heard many songs about the heroic deeds of that noble knight, and Siegfried had aroused in her a warm interest even though she had never seen him. Weeks later, the Burgundians returned home, captive kings and an endless war booty with them. Gunther went to meet them, and when Siegfried dismounted from his horse he kissed the victorious hero. "I will never forget what you have done for me," said King Gunther. And then they sat in the great hall to dine, and the victorious warriors attacked the dishes with as much bravery as they had the enemy forces on the battlefield. The drinking horns circulated the tables filled with Rhine wine. Then Siegfried requested that the captive kings be allowed to participate in the meal, and they were brought inside. "Choose your share of the spoils, O valiant Siegfried," shouted King Gunther, offering the hero a drinking horn. "Then I ask for Lords Ludgast and Ludiger as my share of the spoils, so that I may grant them their freedom, for they fought bravely like lions," said Siegfried. This request did not please Gunther, but he had to fulfill it, and news of Siegfried's chivalrous act soon reached the women, bringing joy to Kriemhild's mind. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself, cheeks glowing, "tomorrow I will garland him and see his face." That night, the princess could not get any sleep. Chapter 4. How Siegfried left with Gunther for Iceland, won the contest for Brunhild's hand in marriage and retrieved treasures from home. The royal city of Worms glistened in the golden sunlight along the Rhine. Church bells rang like the voices of the blessed, urging those who had returned home to express gratitude to God. With humble and noble hearts, they stepped out of the church doors. In a grand procession, they continued on with the celebration organized by King Gunther, which marked their victory with jousting, music, and revelries. Then the doors of the royal women's chambers opened, and accompanied by her mother, Lady Ute, Kriemhild arrived at the festive field surrounded by her noble maidens. She was dressed in a white silk gown that was richly decorated with shining, multicolored trim. She gracefully held her head down, covered by a thick head of blonde hair, and a small delicate crown shimmered in her locks. In her hand was an intricately braided twig, shaped into a wreath. She walked across the festive field amidst the sounds of joyful cries, stopping beside the men. Siegfried stared in amazement at the wondrous girl, and his heart beat loudly when he heard her sweet voice. "Siegfried, my lord," he heard the maiden say, "a noble and valiant hero, I bring the gratitude of Burgundy for your hallowed assistance and chivalrous deeds. I ask that you accept this wreath." Siegfried fell to his knees at the feet of the beautiful maiden, and with trembling hands she placed a garland on his head. Then Siegfried cast his eyes upon her, and their glances melted into one another. Their eyes opened wide and drank in satisfaction from each other, unable to part any more. And bowing towards the hero who was still kneeling before her, Kriemhild pressed a kiss on his lips. The horns blared, swords clanged against shields, and the people's joyful cries rose to the sky. But Kriemhild still stood before Siegfried, bent forward, hands on his shoulders, looking into his eyes with a sense of wonder, having forgotten her surroundings. Then Lady Ute approached, smiling, and took her daughter by the hand. Kriemhild awoke as if from a deep sleep, blushed fiercely and went to her seat accompanied by her mother. But Siegfried leapt to his feet, his happy laughter echoed across the field, he called for his steed, threw himself on its back and won all the competitors in the tournament, 30 of the bravest knights of the land. When the men sat in the pillar hall in the evening and raised their sturdy glasses, King Gunther wanted to hear a song, and Lord Alzine, Volker, cheerfully took up his fiddle and sang. The island echoes with the sound of crashing waves, as if guarding its most valuable treasure. Now you noble knights will learn the reason from the singer's lips this evening. That mountainous land is the home of a woman, no equal can be seen by my eyes. She is tall and stately, her strong limbs are covered with armor, and a helmet on her head. Brunhild, the night rider, is her name, a dark beauty. Her hand is firm, a spear thrower, with the strength of a giant, she always emerges victorious. Many have been lured to her island by love, but none returned home. The suitors fight a battle with Brunhild, but without fame they lose their life. But whoever conquers her, the noble maiden, has found a glorious fortune. Oh, King Gunther, bring her to your grand castle of Worms as your bride. The island resounds with the roar of surging waves, as if to protect its most precious treasure. Now you will learn the reason, you noble knights, from the singer's lips this evening. That mountainous land is the home of a woman, no equal can be seen by my eyes. She is tall and stately, her strong limbs are covered with armor, and a helmet on her head. Brunhild, the night-riding queen, is her name, a dark beauty. Her hand is firm, able to throw a spear, with the power of a giant granting her victory. Many have been lured to her island by love, but no one has returned home. A contest of champions with Brunhild awaits those who seek fame without fear of death. But whoever conquers her, the noble maiden, will have found a glorious happiness. Hey, King Gunther, bring her to your illustrious castle in Worms as your bride. Go around the noise of the waves on the island, like a protection for the most valuable treasure. Now you will know the reason, you noble knights, from the singer's lips this evening. That mountainous land is the home of a woman, no equal can be seen by my eyes. She is tall and stately, her strong limbs are covered with armor, and a helmet on her head. Brunhild, a night rider, is her name, a dark beauty. Her hand is strong and she throws a spear, giant strength gives her victory. Many have led their love to that island, but none returned home. The suitors battle Brunhild, but without fame they lose their life. But whoever wins that heroic maiden, has found a glorious fortune. Hey, King Gunther, bring her to the grand castle of Worms as your bride. As the singer continued his performance, King Gunther sat lost in his thoughts. Do you want to thank the singer? Shouted Lord Hagen von Tranya. His song was magnificent. Then King Gunther raised his head, surveying the audience. I am still unmarried, he spoke slowly. This land needs a queen, the crown awaits an heir. Brunhild. I would like to win you. Turning towards the musician, he asked. What is the name of that island and where is it located? Iceland is its name, my lord king, replied Volker, and it rises majestic from the black waters of the northern sea. Lord Siegfried, said King Gunther, and Siegfried woke up with a start from his dreams, as he had been thinking about the charming Kriemhild the whole time. Lord Siegfried, you have sailed on all seas. Could you perhaps advise me on the way to Brunhild in Iceland? My lord, Siegfried replied, startled, how such thoughts come to your mind? She must become my wife and queen, of her, the only one, said the king. Lord King, begged Siegfried, abandon your intention. That woman is very fierce in nature, you could soon lose your life. What? Gunther laughed. I can certainly defend myself against a woman. My lord, said Siegfried, I have known Brunhild in years past. I know that you are a powerful knight, but you cannot defeat her, for no one can subdue her. This disappointed the king and his desire to conquer Brunhild for himself grew ever stronger. He took Siegfried aside and asked for his help on the journey. Choose the most precious of my treasures, he said, choose whatever you wish. But help me to win Brunhild, I will be forever grateful to you. Then Siegfried said, give me your sister Kriemhild as my bride. Striking his hand into Siegfried's hand, Gunther solemnly promised to fulfill his request. Then they returned to the group of knights and began to discuss the journey. A week later, a ship set out from Worms, sailing down the river Rhine, and it was seen that Gunther and Siegfried were on board, along with Hagen and Dankwart, their horses, all in their armor and fine attire. Lady Jute and Kriemhild stood on the balcony of the castle, and the young girl shed hot tears as she waved her handkerchief in farewell. The princess of the Lower Rhine wept as she sadly missed her hero. But the heroes traveled cheerfully down the Rhine and finally reached the sea. There they purchased a sturdy Viking ship that could withstand the winds and storms of the sea, with Siegfried at the helm, and they sailed across the water towards Iceland. In her fortress of stone, the mighty Brunhild sat, gazing at the turbulent waters. She remembered Siegfried, the strongest of all heroes, and was saddened that he had not returned to her. Hundreds of suitors had come to her, and she had defeated them all in the battle she had challenged them to. There was only one in the world who was stronger than her, and that one was Siegfried. Brunhild's heart was filled with longing love and she sighed deeply, "Oh, if only you could return as a king, my only hero." Then she saw far away a ship, which was coming with swelling sails and sailed through threatening waves so surely forward on its way, that Brunhild jumped up and looked admiringly at the steersman. "Only Siegfried has such a strong hand," she muttered, "only Siegfried has such a brave heart." "He is coming here!" shouted Brunhild joyfully. "He is coming! Siegfried returns!" She quickly returned to her room, summoned her chambermaids and ordered them to dress her in a radiantly majestic outfit. But on the ship Siegfried spoke to the king Gunther and his companions. "Listen now to what I say. That woman is so unboundedly proud that in her eyes men are either kings or vassals. If I present myself as an equal of King Gunther, she might question the king's power and worth. Therefore I renounce the station which my royal origin gives me and appear as the king's vassal. This increases the king's majesty in her eyes." The lords were pleased with Siegfried's speech and praised his loyal mind. Siegfried continued speaking. "By killing the dragon and defeating Alberich, I acquired the mist cloak, which makes me invisible when I wear it. This way, I can fight alongside King Gunther and win the battle with Brunhild without anyone seeing me. Otherwise, we could be parted from our souls, both King Gunther and the rest of us." Then King Gunther felt his heart lighten and he thanked Siegfried warmly. Now beautiful Brunhild stepped out of the castle gate, followed by her court, turning towards the harbor where the ship was just setting anchor. "Thank God," said Gunther and sighed deeply, "the rumor was not exaggerated. I have never seen a more beautiful woman." Siegfried placed strong planks from the ship to the shore. He first led Gunther's horse ashore and held the stirrup as the king mounted the saddle. Only then did he fetch his own steed and mount it alongside Hagen and Dankwart. Brunhild gazed in amazement at his behavior. "Fair Siegfried, the valiant hero," she cried, laughing. "What mischief have you now come up with? It is not fitting for you to perform such services for others. But I wholeheartedly welcome you and assure you that I am delighted to see you here and have been eagerly awaiting your arrival." But Siegfried replied, "You are mistaken, Queen. You should not be greeting me, but the most powerful of kings, Gunther of Worms, whom you see before you and whom I belong to, as his vassal, with the honor of being so." Then the proud Brunhild faltered and turned her gaze towards Gunther. And Gunther rode towards her, jumped off his horse, and bowed respectfully like a knight. "What brings you to me and to this land?" asked Brunhild haughty. "I hope to conquer you in your love, lovely Brunhild," cried the king. "I will not leave your lands otherwise, but in your company." With a disdainful gaze, the heroine scrutinized him from head to toe. "You are wasting your effort, noble sir. Couldn't you have died at home?" "I shall not die until I have fully enjoyed your love," said Gunther. Brunhild roared loudly. "If you long for blows, then prepare yourselves for the tournament tomorrow morning. And you shall not experience noon. Chamberlains, provide lodging for the gentlemen for their last night of life." And still sneering mockingly, she turned and returned to the castle, not even looking at Siegfried who stood humbly aside. The only man she had ever loved had become a vassal to another, causing her pride to be deeply hurt. But the travelers from Worms soon retired for the night. They knew that the next day would demand the fullest extent of their strength. It was early morning when the resounding blare of trumpets woke them from their sleep. Quickly they rose from their slumber and helped Gunther equip himself for battle. Likewise, they themselves equipped themselves as best they could. Then they rode to the battlefield. Accompanied by her knights and courtiers, Brunhild approached. A golden armor protected her body, a sparkling helmet with an eagle's wings adorned her black curly hair. Her powerful white arms were bare and she was armed with a spear and a shield. The heroine's presence was so overpowering that Gunther felt his breath catch. "I will set 3 tasks for you," spoke the powerful woman. "If you complete them, I will become your wife. But if you fail in any of them, you will be a lost man and so will your companions. Make your decision now." "Name those tasks," Gunther briefly replied. Brunhild continued. "First, show your skill with a spear and try to make me fall to the ground. Second, you must throw a 100-pound boulder of rock. Don't throw it an inch shorter than mine. Third, you must, armor and weapons in hand, defeat me in a long jump. Well, are you still up for it?" Then Siegfried spoke, "My lord king, allow me to return to the ship to fetch the bridal gift." Gunther agreed to his request, and Brunhild bit her lip. But Siegfried only returned to the castle, where no one was paying attention to him. There he put on the mist veil and returned invisibly to his companions. "Courage," he whispered, touching Gunther's arm, "I am here with you." The horses were taken aside, and Brunhild took her place. She held the massive spear in her hand, as if it were nothing but a stick, raised her shield for protection, bent her torso backwards, aimed, and threw the weapon with such force that a whistling sound echoed through the air and penetrated deeply into Gunther's shield, breaking it. If Siegfried's hand had not been supporting Gunther, the king would have collapsed to the ground. Siegfried quickly removed the spear tip from the shield, in such a way that it appeared as if Gunther had done it himself. And nobly, as if he wanted to show mercy to the beautiful woman, he turned the spear upside down and threw it back, dull end first. Despite this, the strike was still so powerful that it dented Brunhild's shield, causing her to lose her balance and fall to the ground. Brunhild rose to her feet, stunned, adjusting her clothing. The flush of shame and anger burned on her face, and hatred leapt out like lightning from her night-dark eyes. "Don't rejoice too soon," she shouted angrily, "I just wanted to make a fool of you." And she took hold of the 100-pound boulder, made it dance on her flat hand like a light ball, clasped it with her hands and threw it with a powerful force for at least 50 yards. And with a mighty sprint, she leapt in her armor into the air, following the still flying boulder, and surpassing it by a bit. Then, a deadly silence fell over the competition field. Hagen whispered to his brother Dankwart, "Loosen your sword from the scabbard and stand back to back with me. It's going to be bloody hard." Gunther walked up to the boulder and Siegfried walked invisibly by his side. Siegfried picked up the boulder from the ground as if Gunther had done it, tensed all his muscles, and threw the chunk even farther than Brunhild. Then taking Gunther by the waist he flew through the air like a hawk with its prey and landed far beyond the boulder. With her body bent forward and her face distorted, Brunhild had watched the throwing and jumping. Now her mighty arms sank to her body. "I never would have believed that anyone other than Siegfried was capable of doing this," said the heroine with a heavy breath. "Now I can see you made the right decision, King Gunther, taking Siegfried as your vassal. I agree to be your bride, as I promised you." Then the horns blared and the joyful cries of the people rose to the sky. But Siegfried had rushed back to the gate, taken off his mist mantle, and now he returned to the tournament field as if he knew nothing of what had happened. "Onward!" he shouted. "King Gunther! To battle! You will surely win!" Everyone laughed as he had missed the impressive competition, and Brunhild looked at him disdainfully. "Where is my bridal gift, man?" she asked coldly. But Siegfried bowed humbly and replied, "Merciful Queen, it was so large that it couldn't fit in my arms. The entire contents of the ship are yours." With a shrug of her shoulders, Brunhild walked past him to the shore to check how much gold and precious stones the ship contained. And with a disdainful tone, she exclaimed, "And you dare offer such worthless trinkets to the Queen of Iceland? If you think you can insult me without consequences, I'll call upon my knights and swordsmen and have you all captured and thrown into the sea." Gunther stood with a pale face before the enraged woman and found no answer. But Siegfried laughed, "Do not misunderstand us, noble queen. Here you see only a sample of the treasures that are on their way here to you as a bridal gift. The ship that is bringing them has been delayed due to a storm. Allow me to go and fetch it so that I can direct it to port." With a dark look, Brunhild gazed upon the brave speaker. "You will bitterly regret if you dare deceive me," she said. "These others will remain as hostages with me. Hurry so that you can soon return and show that you have kept your word. Otherwise, you and your companions will never see the shores of the Rhine again." Then Siegfried took his leave of Gunther, Hagen, and Dankwart, bade farewell to the queen and went on board the ship with his horse Grain. The wind blew favorably, the sails snapped and fluttered, the hero steered the stern, and like a bird the ship vanished in the distant horizon. Faster than usual, Siegfried reached the mouth of the Rhine, commanded the sailors to await his return and leapt onto Grain's back. His loyal steed carried him as if flying through the land of Rhine until the country of the 7 mountains lay before him, and the hero rode along the familiar path towards the Dragon's Rock, where the rich treasures of Nibelung were stored. It was night when Siegfried dismounted his horse. And he decided to test the vigilance of his steward Alberich, and roared like a drunkard at the gate and demanded entrance with hammering fist blows. Suddenly the gate opened with a jerk, and an enraged dwarf jumped out with a long iron rod, striking the hero so hard that sparks seemed to fly from Siegfried. He might have never seen Iceland again if he hadn't managed to catch the rampaging dwarf by the beard, and get a firm grip on him in the midst of the blows. "Good evening, Alberich my friend," he chuckled. "I see that you are well and in good spirits." The angry dwarf recognized his master's voice and stopped flailing and kicking. "Forgive me," he said, completely out of breath, "for being a bit brusque with you." "Is this just a bit?" Siegfried laughed as he touched his bumps. "God save me from ever getting a little more of this." And he cheerfully patted his faithful guard on the shoulder. Then he ordered Alberich to immediately wake up the Nibelung knights, and he chose a magnificent group from them and as much treasure as could fit in the riverboat. The next day, he set off with his treasure and knights along the Rhine towards the sea, where his warship and crew were waiting. The treasures were quickly transferred from one ship to another, and soon they journeyed amidst the roaring of storms and waves towards Iceland. Gunther the king sat on the beach with Hagen and Dankwart. His mind was sad and gloomy, without a spark of hope. They talked about Siegfried's escape, and many harsh words were spoken about the hero, whom they assumed had already happily arrived home while they stayed here waiting for death, a shameful death at the hand of a woman. No doubt Siegfried intended to steal the whole of Burgundy and arrogantly ascend Gunther's throne. They spoke of these things bitterly, suspecting Siegfried's loyalty. Then Hagen suddenly jumped up and gestured in shock to the distant horizon. His sharp eyes had spotted a ship approaching on the horizon. "He's coming! He's coming!" he shouted. "Siegfried is returning." Then former pride returned to King Gunther's soul and he stood up and spoke coldly. He had sworn it. Quickly Brunhild approached, and the knights and courtiers followed her with expressions of wonder. "High Princess," Gunther addressed her, "prepare yourself for a journey to Worms. Siegfried is coming, and I do not wish to linger without your love for one more day." Brunhild looked at the approaching ship with a stiff gaze. Now the ship dropped its anchor, and strong hands pushed the gangplank ashore. Siegfried stood proudly on the ship's deck, allowing his magnificent group of Nibelung knights to step before Brunhild, so that the men on the island paled at the sight of them. Laughing, the hero then gestured to the treasures he had brought with him. "I brought new gifts from home, noble queen," he said. "It seemed simpler to me this way." In awe, Brunhild gazed at the riches, admiring the elite knights. Unwillingly she now stepped onto the ship beside Gunther to sail to Worms and to celebrate their wedding. Chapter 5. How Siegfried celebrated his wedding with Kriemhild and Gunther with Brunhild, and how Siegfried helped Gunther to subdue Brunhild. Oh, how quickly the messengers galloped along the banks of the Rhine with their reins flying. The horses' heads were decorated with flower garlands and the riders wore green boughs in their iron helmets. They rode without resting until the lovely city of Worms appeared before them. The people there gathered to ask for news, but the messengers raced on, shouting only a few words of greeting, until they arrived at the castle courtyard, where they reported to Lady Jute and Princess Kriemhild, and to the young princes Gernot and Giselher. In the throne room, Lady Jute and her children received the messengers and asked them to recount their story in full detail. The people back home heard about the hero's adventures in Iceland, King Gunther's victory, Siegfried's sea journey that saved them all, and the expected return of the heroes, accompanied by the noble Brunhild. One of the messengers, speaking on behalf of the others, said, "King Gunther commands this now. Preparations for the wedding must start immediately, without any regard for the cost of gold, fine clothing, or valuables. All the nobles of Burgundy must be summoned to attend the wedding, which is set to take place a week from today. Upon his arrival in Worms, King Gunther will promptly raise Brunhild to the throne of Burgundy at his side." Lady Jute then cried tears of joy, and Kriemhild's breast rose and her eyes shone with excitement as she heard of Siegfried's loyalty. But Gernot and Giselher hastened to fulfill their brother's request, and the wedding invitations were sent out that same day, inviting all the nobles of Burgundy to the wedding feast in Worms. Now, life and activity flourished in the castle of Worms. People were joyfully bustling and rushing about in the preparations for the wedding, from morning till night. Hunters roamed both shores of the Rhine with their packs of hounds, bringing back deer, plump stags, and mighty bears from the forests and mountains. Fishermen cast their nets and lines and caught pike, red salmon, and plump trout from the river. Mr. Rummold was in charge of the kitchen, and in just a few days, he gave the kitchen boys more slaps than they usually received in a whole year. Mr. Hunold spent most of his days in the wine cellar, and his face became redder from serious wine tastings than Burgundy wine, which shimmered purple in the barrels. Mr. Sindold, the steward, ran nimbly up and down the stairs, getting the rooms ready for the noble guests and setting the tables for the wedding feast. Lady Ute displayed her finest linens and most beautiful tableware, and Kriemhild spent hours by her chests, choosing the most charming garments to please her hero Siegfried at the wedding. The day of the king's expected arrival had come. Guests came from near and far to Worms to greet King Gunther upon his landing. King Siegmund and Queen Siegelind of Xanten, Siegfried's elderly parents, also came, to whom Siegfried had sent a message as soon as he reached the mainland. And from the forest came the smith mime, riding a tall mare, and people laughed at him because of his hump. But he paid no heed to their mockery and rejoiced in his heart at the heroic deeds of his foster son. The royal ship approached ceremoniously along the Rhine, and the horses had a hard time hauling it to the harbor with ropes. King Gunther stood grandly on the deck of the ship with a crown on his head, and next to him stood the dark beauty Brunhild. Among the knights, Siegfried rose taller than all the others, and his golden locks shone in the sun's rays. Oh, how the minstrels on the shore blew their horns and drummed, played their violins and pipes. Oh, how the knights beat their shields with their swords and spears, and how everyone sang and rejoiced. Indeed, that was the life on the Rhine. King Gunther led the proud Brunhild from the ship to the shore, where Lady Ute approached them, along with her children, the handsome Gernot, the merry Giselher, and the charming Kriemhild, and they all greeted Brunhild with kisses and embraces. But Siegfried approached Gunther and quietly reminded him of his promise. Then King Gunther gestured to his blushing sister to greet Siegfried, and Siegfried embraced the maiden with his both arms and kissed her eyes and mouth. "Would you dare to be my bride," he whispered to her, "you lovely one, if I tell you that your brother Gunther gives his consent?" Kriemhild only nodded and put her hands around the hero's neck, and Siegfried hugged her tightly but gently. Then he took her to her parents and they rejoiced over their sweet daughter-in-law. Then Siegfried called out to Mime and honored him in front of all the people with kisses and embraces. Thus the mockery was silenced, and no one noticed the smith's hump anymore. Never had a grander wedding procession been seen than the one where Gunther walked with Brunhild and Siegfried with Kriemhild, and there was no room in the cathedral for the huge crowd that filled the steps and churchyard. And the bells rang out joyfully as the newlyweds departed from this grand building and made their way to the royal palace, where a feast was awaiting them. Gunther and Brunhild seated themselves on raised thrones, and opposite them, on thrones of equal height, sat Siegfried and Kriemhild. The guests at table were carefully arranged according to each one's rank and estate. Brunhild kept her eyes fixed on Siegfried without touching her food or drink. King Gunther noticed with sadness the displeasure of his beloved wife and quietly and tenderly inquired the reason for it. "How could I be in a good mood," Brunhild replied disdainfully, "when I see that you have no shred of pride?" Gunther blushed hotly and said, "The King of Burgundy has enough pride, and no one should doubt it." "Be proud of it," Brunhild replied cheerfully, "when a king's sister is allowed to be given to a vassal as his wife. This shameful act takes away my desire to eat and drink." The king answered her hesitantly, "Siegfried has done great services to me. Do not inquire into this matter further, but rejoice in this moment of happiness." But Brunhild's expression remained menacing and proud. "It is obvious that a vassal serves his lord," he said. "So there must be some special reason why you reward him so extravagantly, and you keep it from me. Tell me the truth if you want me to show you love." Then Gunther assured that there was no talk of any secret, but that Siegfried had earned such a great reward solely by his loyalty and courage. But Brunhild remained silent and sullen all evening. The courtiers approached with torches to lead the newlyweds to their rooms, and Brunhild walked haughtily next to her husband. Without looking at him, she undressed and went to bed. "My dear," said Gunther trying to caress her gently, "banish those bitter thoughts from your mind and make room for joy." But Kriemhild fiercely replied from the pillows, "Don't touch me, or it will end up badly for you." This enraged the king and he grabbed Brunhild by the arms to force her and make her feel his strength. But Brunhild sprang from the bed, threw Gunther away from her, shut both his wrists in one hand, took her belt, bound his hands and feet together with it, and hung him up like a bundle of clothes on the bedpost. "So that's it," she said. And such a man has defeated me in a spear and stone throwing contest and in a heroic leap while wearing armor and weapons. There must be some secret to it, and I want to find out, my friend, or you will have to be content with your love without receiving any love in return from me." But Gunther begged and prayed her to release him from that wretched state, solemnly assuring her that his weakness was only due to the fatigue of a long journey. Brunhild laughed mockingly. "Good night, my lord and hero. And next night I'll hang you again in the same place, and so on until I know what I ought to know." Then she went peacefully to bed, straightened out her lovely limbs and fell asleep. King Gunther endured a terrible night as he hung bound to Brunhild's bedpost. And when Brunhild released him in the morning, every one of his joints ached so badly that he could barely stand. Siegfried noticed his condition and asked the reason for it. Gunther hesitated for a long time with his answer. Then he confessed the events of the night to his brother-in-law. "What should I do?" he asked, grinding his teeth. "I will be a laughingstock if I can't control my wife. And she was so dazzlingly beautiful in her rage." "Trust me, brother-in-law," said Siegfried after a moment of thought. "I have a plan." "Oh Siegfried," cried King Gunther, "tell me about it. I will be eternally grateful to you if you can tame that wild creature." "So listen to what I say," said Siegfried. "Let's retire to bed earlier tonight, so that my wife Kriemhild does not notice that I am missing for an hour. When you enter your bedroom, I will already be there, well hidden. Immediately turn off the light and move to the farthest corner. But in the darkness, I will take your place, subdue the wild woman, and clear the field for you again." This proposal was not exactly to the king's liking, but in his dire straits he nonetheless agreed to it. In the evening, the mighty Siegfried awaited in the royal bedroom. He stood hidden behind a tall screen. King Gunther arrived there in good time with Queen Brunhild, and as Brunhild undressed, Gunther extinguished the light. "Do you think you can hold your own in the dark?" Brunhild mocked him as she went to bed. "If you approach me, I'll hang you up again on the bedpost." Siegfried slipped out from behind the shade, and Gunther hid himself in the corner. Siegfried stepped up to the bed and grabbed Brunhild by the nightgown. But Brunhild sprang out of the bed so that the floor reverberated, and with a furious push threw the strong man against the wall. "Wow," thought Siegfried, "I almost got my head chopped off." But he didn't say a word, so that Brunhild wouldn't recognize his voice, and in silence he approached Brunhild again. "Haven't you had enough yet?" shouted the brave woman. "Wait, I'll swaddle you so tightly that you'll suffocate." And she wrapped her arms around Siegfried, so that the strong man had to exert all his strength so that Brunhild would not throw him to the ground. They struggled in the dark, tossing each other against the walls, so that the anguished king was horrified and had to jump from one corner to another so as not to get in their way. Brunhild held her belt in one hand and tried to tie up her opponent's hands. The hero thought his last moment had come, and the shame of being defeated by a woman gave him new strength and unleashed his rage. Although he had so far wanted to spare Brunhild as a queen and woman, he now attacked her with full force. He grabbed her by the waist with an iron grip, lifted her off the ground with immense power and threw the wild creature onto the bed, causing her limbs to crack. Brunhild tried to get up, but Siegfried jumped to her side and held her so tightly that Brunhild's breathing was choked off and she felt her strength fail. Then she started to beg and plead. "Oh, Gunther King, please forgive me. I will never show you insolence and rudeness again. Now I have realized from your blows and grips that you truly are the strongest man in the world." But Siegfried felt the ring of Nibelung on her finger, which he had once given to Brunhild as an engagement ring, and he quietly drew it from her finger without remembering the curse of Nibelung that followed it. As if dressing himself in his nightgown, he left the bed and quietly slipped out of the room. The hero had walked through the castle under the protection of his mist cloak so that the servants would not see him. When he finally reached Kriemhild, the struggle with Brunhild had lasted longer than he had previously anticipated, and Kriemhild had already been waiting for him. Quickly he pulled off his mist cloak at the door and came to Kriemhild in visible form. "Good evening, my dear wife," he greeted her cheerfully and saw that she had been crying. Lovingly, he bent over her and asked her about the cause of her sorrow. Crying and sighing, Kriemhild now said, "It has only been 2 days since we were married, and now you are already tired of me." "Oh, you sweet, jealous being," Siegfried joked playfully and told Gunther still needed a bit of his help. "You are not bound to serve her," the young wife protested. On your journey to Iceland, you agreed to do so out of kindness voluntarily. Now you have fulfilled your duty, and Brunhild should not have a reason to treat my hero with arrogance." Siegfried burst out laughing, remembering the passionate hour which had just passed, as well as Brunhild's submission. "Why are you laughing at my words?" asked Kriemhild, pleading and reaching for his hand. As she touched it, she felt a strange ring on Siegfried's finger and stared at it with ever-growing intensity. That is Brunhild's ring," she groaned. "Oh, don't deny it, for I saw it with my own eyes in her hand. You left me alone to cry because of her. She has bewitched you and I am a miserable, betrayed wife." She covered her pale face with her hands and threw herself onto the bed, sobbing. The pain of the young, beautiful creature deeply shocked the hero's mind. He whispered thousands of tender words to her, but Kriemhild only shook her head and sobbed more intensely. "No, Siegfried, no, you are not telling me the truth." Unable to find any other way to alleviate her intense pain and to dry her tears, Siegfried spoke, overtaken by his compassion. "So be it. We are husband and wife, and a husband and wife should be one. So I will explain everything to you, trusting in the silence of my beloved wife as firmly as I trust myself. No living person must ever learn of it." And now he told his wife about his past life. He explained how he had ridden through the magic flames and freed Brunhild of their engagement, and how he had left Brunhild due to her unbecoming pride. He realized that Brunhild had no regard for her loving husband and only sought a powerful king. Many years later, Sir Volker sang in the royal hall about Brunhild's beauty and strength, and King Gunther's mind was filled with a desire to possess her. But Siegfried had already seen Kriemhild, his beloved wife, and no other image held a place in his heart. To win her, Siegfried guided King Gunther to Iceland himself and followed him as his vassal, knowing that Brunhild would not have spared him a glance if Siegfried had appeared beside him as an equal hero. He fought under the veil of mist that made him invisible, threw the spear and stone in King Gunther's stead, and carried him through the air in a long jump. He did all this for the love of his Kriemhild. Then he went to fetch the Nibelung treasure and knights to ransom King Gunther and his companions from Brunhild's rule, and to make her go to Worms for the wedding. Kriemhild's tears had long since dried up. She gazed at the hero in secret admiration, and her bosom rose passionately as she heard of such selfless love. But the ring still gleamed on Siegfried's finger, and, falling again under suspicion, Kriemhild asked, "But why did you go to her tonight, and why did she give you that ring as a pledge?" Then Siegfried told her about the difficult situation Gunther had found himself in, and his touching complaints and despair. "Would I let my brother-in-law, after I had led him so far, fall into such deep disgrace?" he asked. "After helping him so far, your brother, whom I have to thank for my sweet wife. I was content, Kriemhild, but a person who doesn't show concern for the suffering of others does not deserve to be happy. That's why I've been with Gunther tonight, subduing his fierce wife. Now Brunhild believes in Gunther's strength and treats him with tender love. But the sparkle of the ring tempted me to take it off her finger. No other woman may wear the engagement ring I gave, but the one whose heart belongs to me through both joys and sorrows." "Oh, my love!" cried Kriemhild, embracing him and nestled her head against his chest. This brought great joy to the hero, and he removed the ring from his finger and gave it to his sweet wife. "But don't use it in front of Brunhild," he warned, lest she ever discover that the one who stole her ring and her heroic powers was not Gunther. Thus the ring of the Nibelung came into Kriemhild's possession, and the curse had not departed from it. But Brunhild was deeply ashamed for many days after realizing that she was no longer an invincible warrior princess, but had become like other women, defeated. She was also hurt that Siegfried saw her as the submissive wife of another man, as she hated him just as passionately as she had once loved him due to his overpowering masculinity. Then she summoned Hagen to her side to consult with him. The grim Hagen von Tranya spoke, "My highest aspiration is to protect the grandeur of my king and his household. Whoever your enemy is, O queen, I also consider as my foe. I know no other loyalty." Brunhild reached out to him with both hands and with a dark gaze, and the dark one-eyed leaned forward to kiss them. Then they began plotting Siegfried's murder and kept a close watch on every move he made. Siegfried's gentle and caring mime, who was still staying in Worms, noticed their intentions and he secretly listened to their negotiations and found out their plans. Siegfried's elderly parents, King Siegmund and Queen Siegelind, had returned to Xanten, and they asked the hero to come home and take over the rule. Also a messenger from King Ludiger of Saxony arrived at Siegfried's place, and his message was: Ludiger the king is dying without an heir, and the throne of Saxony will soon be unoccupied. Because King Ludiger has come to know you, Siegfried the hero, as the most valiant warrior and the most chivalrous man in all the land, he wishes to leave the crown and the throne of Saxony to you when death calls him away. He greets you as his son and heir. So Siegfried's chivalrous deed was rewarded. Siegfried summoned his teacher and foster father, Mime, and shared the good news with him. Mime's eyes lit up with joy when he heard how high his pupil's strength and pure intentions had elevated him. However, Mime's unease grew stronger, and he advised Siegfried with heartfelt words: do not reveal King Ludiger's generous gift to anyone in Gunther's court. Brunhild and Hagen hate you, and Gunther is only seemingly friendly towards you. And he told Siegfried all he had learned, and, in Kriemhild's name, he prayed for him to depart Burgundy. At last, Siegfried agreed to follow Mime's wishes for Kriemhild's sake, and Mime ordered the Nibelung knights to secretly prepare for the journey. The next night, Siegfried rode at the head of the knightly company, accompanied by Kriemhild and Mime, as they secretly left the castle gates and headed towards the city of Xanten, located along the lower Rhine. How furious Brunhild was, when she discovered the next morning that Siegfried's dwelling was empty and her hateful plans had come to nothing. Chapter 6. How Siegfried and Kriemhild, following their summons, came to Worms, how the queens quarreled with each other, and how Siegfried was killed. Along the lower Rhine River was Xanten with its cathedral and royal castles. Its lush meadows, where herds of cattle were herded, extended all the way to the Netherlands, and the green forests provided hunting grounds as far as the eye could see. It was a charming area, where peace and tranquility prevailed, and the Rhine flowed so slowly that it seemed as if it could hardly bear to part from those happy shores. Here Siegfried ruled as king, and his power also included the land of Saxony beyond the border, as Ludiger had died and Siegfried had inherited his kingdom. Here, Kriemhild lived, cherished by love and affection, and often she felt as though fate must be envious of her happiness, for she had given her husband 2 children, a son and a daughter, who were their greatest source of pride. But the years passed with nothing but sunny days, the children grew and prospered, and there was perpetual peace in the land, for all the neighboring lands knew of Siegfried's vigorous and strong hand, and dared not disturb him. Often Kriemhild would sit in Siegfried's lap, leaning onto him as their children played at their feet, and the thriving land surrounded them with its sweet fragrances. Then they would sit quietly, listening to each other's heartbeats, and their lips would join in a tender kiss. But in Worms, life continued without bringing true happiness, and as the years passed, Brunhild's hatred for Siegfried only grew stronger. Her thoughts were constantly focused on finding a way to face Siegfried and destroy him. When she looked at her weak son, whom she had given to Gunther, and heard of Siegfried's powerful children, her hatred turned into an insane pain. Finally, she approached King Gunther and spoke to him, hiding her feelings skillfully. How long has it been since we last heard from Siegfried? How long have we been deprived of seeing your dear sister Kriemhild's sunny face? Given that Siegfried is your vassal, he has remained away from Worms and his lord for too long, causing us to long for the sweet Kriemhild in vain. I strongly request you to send envoys to Xanten and invite our beloved couple to Worms to celebrate the midsummer festival with us. Thus spoke that treacherous woman, and Gunther did not dare to resist her will for fear that Brunhild would find out that he had no power over Siegfried, and would start to despise him. So he sent messengers on their way, and they rode for days along the Rhine towards Xanten, arriving at the home of Siegfried and Kriemhild, surrounded by their happiness. The beautiful queen wore the Nibelung ring on her finger, and a malevolent gleam could be seen in it, when the messengers arrived in the throne room and presented the invitation from Gunther and Brunhild with warm words. Kriemhild's tender soul was seized by fierce homesickness when the messengers spoke of Worms and of Lady Jute, her awaiting mother, of her beloved brothers Gernot and Giselher, of all companions and playing fields of childhood. A tear hung heavily on her eyelash and fell into her lap. Siegfried saw it, and in that instant he had made his decision. Greet Gunther the king and his queen, Lady Jute and Gernot and Giselher, and all the beloved knights and courtiers, that we are joyfully honored by your invitation and gratefully accept it. We will meet again in Worms, you good messengers. There we will raise our cups in celebration," cried Kriemhild with delight. He generously rewarded the messengers, and Kriemhild wrapped her arms around his neck with a laugh. That was a joyful preparation for the summer visit to the Rhine. The knights looked magnificent in their new outfits and their horses whinnied with sparkling harnesses. The convoy drivers sang cheerful songs, but only Mime, the smith, who had received a message in the forest, arrived worried and wearing an old iron armor. However, Siegfried did not heed any warnings. People's minds become pure over time, he replied to Mime. How can I think ill of them when I want no evil myself? And listen, my faithful friend, Lady Kriemhild rejoices at this journey. So Mime, in his old iron armor, rode at the front of the magnificent band of knights, just behind Siegfried and Kriemhild, while the old King Siegmund remained at home with his grandchildren to govern the kingdom. However, Siegfried sang merrily alongside Kriemhild as they journeyed, just as he did in his youth, and people gazed in wonder at the magnificent hero, and the sight of him brought happiness to everyone's heart. He traveled through the lands, singing, like a joyful spring. They came to the proud city of Worms, and the Burgundian princes and all the people welcomed them with joy. But Brunhild immediately began to ponder how she could hurt Kriemhild. In her radiant beauty, Siegfried's lovely wife sat next to the queen in a decorated tournament viewing stand. There the knights and lords rode and jousted for high reward under the eyes of the ladies. As Siegfried repeatedly emerged victorious over the others, Brunhild asked her overjoyed sister-in-law, "Why is it, my dear sister, that we hear so rarely from you?" Kriemhild kindly replied, "We were unsure if we were welcomed by you." Raising her head with pride, Brunhild now answered, "Well, if not you, then at least of the tribute that you have neglected to pay every year." Kriemhild went deathly pale and a shiver ran through her body. She felt that her sister-in-law was intentionally trying to offend her. Pride also took hold of her mind, so she also raised her head and replied with a stern voice, "You are mistaken, noble lady, my lord Siegfried is not bound to serve to anyone but me in love." "Could this brave knight have kept secret from you," Brunhild asked mockingly, "that he is a servant of my lord Gunther?" Kriemhild's breath was about to catch, but she still controlled her emotions and said, "You have been told tales, honorable lady," Kriemhild retorted. Brunhild quivered, "I have heard it from Gunther, your brother. Do you want to claim that the king is lying?" Kriemhild still repeated with trembling lips, "Nevertheless, only tales have been told to you." Brunhild proudly rose from her seat. "Let us continue this conversation," she whispered fiercely, "I will show you your place, my noble sister-in-law." Kriemhild covered her face with her veil to hide the tears of anger that welled up in her eyes. But Siegfried saw them nonetheless when he came to her room that evening, and Kriemhild told him everything that had transpired. The hero laughed heartily, as he had expected worse misfortune, and he forbade his wife to get into a quarrel with Brunhild. "It is bad when the host fails to fulfill their responsibilities," he said, "but even worse if the guest is quarrelsome and ungrateful." Thus spoke the experienced man. But in his heart he did not understand why Gunther hadn't told the truth to his wife. The morning of the summer solstice dawned brightly over Worms, and the bells called out to the solemn high mass in the cathedral. In their finest garments, the knights marched to church, and separately from them, the women went in splendid clothes. The kings and their entourage had already entered the cathedral when Queen Brunhild and Queen Kriemhild met each other at the church portal. Gunther's wife was dressed in purple silk, which was perfect for her black hair. Siegfried's fair-haired spouse was like a bright morning in her light blue dress. As they now ascended the stairs leading up to the door side by side, Queen Brunhild suddenly hastened ahead to prevent Kriemhild from entering the door at the same time as her. "What do you think you're doing?" she scolded angrily. "Don't you know what courtly etiquette requires and that the more noble woman should go first?" "If we followed that way," Queen Kriemhild replied, "you should step back, for my husband Siegfried's name stands higher than King Gunther's. He is Gunther the king's hired servant and weapons bearer." Queen Brunhild exclaimed, stamping her foot on the ground. "He held his lord's banner in Iceland. Stand back, I say, and take your places among the courtiers." Kriemhild's royal blood boiled up, and shaking her fair arms, she screamed at her sister-in-law in rage from the insult she had suffered. "You're lying. Because your husband was a weakling, Siegfried resorted to martial stratagem and acted as his vassal. Even in the competition with you, Siegfried helped him as well. Do you really believe that Gunther defeated you? It was my lord and hero Siegfried." "Ha, how you pale! Hidden under the protection of his misty cloak, my lord fought against you while Gunther merely followed his footsteps. And as he leapt, my lord Siegfried carried your king over his shoulder through the air. What do you say now? Do you feel ashamed of your insolence? Face distorted, Queen Brunhild stared at her raging sister-in-law. And yet you are lying. She screamed. No one on earth is stronger than Gunther, for I have fought with him over my bed and felt the dreadfulness of his manly strength. You felt Siegfried's strength, Kriemhild, the queen, taunted. Siegfried threw you onto your bed and forced you to humbly plead for mercy. Liar. Brunhild burst out at her again. Then Kriemhild stretched out her hand towards her, with the ring of Nibelung shining on her finger. Do you recognize this ring? She shouted triumphantly. Siegfried took it from you. He stole his engagement ring back from you that night when he subdued you and delivered you to Gunther like an old rag. The Queen Brunhild collapsed in powerless rage on the floor outside the open door, and Queen Kriemhild proudly stepped through and was the first to enter the church. With unsteady steps, Brunhild returned home, where she sat and contemplated revenge in her anger, until Hagen arrived, having obeyed her command. This stern man had already heard of the dispute between the queens. Here I am, he said, and his eyes blazing with fire. Tell me what I must do. My queen shall never be placed in second place, at any time or in any place. So you already know how Kriemhild has insulted me. I know only this, said Hagen darkly, that Kriemhild must die. No. Brunhild cried out, springing up with fiery rage in her eyes. No, that would not suffice. She exclaimed. It's easy for a woman to die when her heart is overflowing with pride for her husband, but she must endure something worse, much worse, something worse than suffering 1,000 deaths. She must see her beloved husband dead and battered by weapons, deaf to the call of love and the anguished cries of pain. And she herself must be cast into a harsh fate, at the mercy of people. This most horrifying fate, Kriemhild, shall suffer. The dark man replied, Siegfried will die today. And they sat together and discussed their dark plan. Siegfried fiercely demanded an explanation from his wife and scolded her harshly like a poorly raised shrew, for cruelly rewarding the hospitality they had received. One may leave a house where they experience insults, he said, but one should not repay insults in kind. I did it for you, Kriemhild wailed, tears streaming down her face, I did it to defend your honor. The herald Sindold knocked on the door and asked for the noble Lord Siegfried to come and speak with Lord Gunther. Siegfried immediately followed, hoping to settle the dispute at once. But at Gunther's side sat Hagen von Tranya, and he had spoken to the king, Siegfried must die today, or you will lose the love of your wife and the respect of your people. It will happen on a hunting trip today. There is no other option. Gunther had given his consent with pale lips. When Siegfried entered, the gentleman rose and stood ready to make peace. I am well aware, King Gunther spoke, that you are innocent of those insulting words. No one can truly judge the words of women. Neither of them will admit to starting the argument, but both want to have the last say. Let us not waste any more words on this unimportant issue, my noble Siegfried. To show that there is no disagreement among men, let us go on a joyous hunting trip together today and this evening. This will immediately put an end to all malicious gossip. Moved by the king's boundless kindness, Siegfried extended both of his arms in friendship to his brother-in-law. I promise that my wife will apologize to yours as soon as she has recovered from her tears. I have scolded her quite harshly, spoke Siegfried with a sigh of relief. But Hagen went to summon the hunters and to provide food and drink for the grand hunting feast. Then, he quickly went to speak with Lady Kriemhild. Noble queen, he exclaimed merrily, our lords have reached an agreement and are setting out to hunt on the other side of the Rhine, in the Odenwald. Quickly gather Siegfried's hunting gear, for we shall depart immediately. Kriemhild lamented, he leaves me in a fit of anger and will be cursed with bad hunting luck. I will protect him, Hagen promised. Besides, he is impossible to harm, for neither human weapon nor beast can penetrate his skin, except for that one small spot, which the stories of his adventures tell of. But Kriemhild still lamented, O Hagen, my dear uncle, how harshly my lord scolded me, and now my heart is so heavy, as if my lord were threatened by some imminent calamity. And what if a wild boar attacks him with its tusks or a wild bull with its horns? They could hit that one spot where Siegfried can be wounded, and since my lord is angry with me, his thoughts will not be on dangers of hunting. Oh dear God, how could I survive the guilt if any misfortune should befall him? So the queen lamented, her mind overwhelmed by dark forebodings. Then Hagen spoke to her, I understand quite well that you are worried on this day. But I can relieve you of your worries by promising that I will not leave my lord's side on the hunting expedition. Take the red thread and sew a mark on his hunting jacket, where the hero's vulnerable spot is located, and I will faithfully guard it with my shield. With many words of thanks, the weeping woman followed the advice and sewed a little red cross on the back of the doublet. But Hagen quickly left, as he heard Siegfried coming. In the midday heat, the hunters crossed the Rhine, mounted their horses, and galloped into the cool shade of the forest. Oh, how Siegfried hurried forth, following the pack of hounds. Oh, how his resounding cries frightened the beasts from their caves and thickets. He showed how to slay the magnificent wild bull with his spear, so that it fell dead to the ground. He shot an attacking wolf with an arrow. And as the growling wild boar approached him, he gave it a mighty blow on the neck with his sword Barmung, so that the beast's head was severed from its body and fell into the swamp with eyes rolling. He left the stags and wild goats for others to kill. Deeper and deeper he ventured into the dark forest, the hunters following him. Then a bear rose from its den, larger than had ever been seen before, and stood on its hind legs. The hunters scattered in all directions, shouting in terror. But Siegfried leaped from his horse, threw himself at the beast, knocked it to the ground, tied its feet together, and brought it alive back to the camp. And there was a great rejoicing and shouting among all the hunting companions. They sat around the campfires and got their hands on the juicy roast. Then Siegfried cried out, "Where is the cupbearer? My tongue is sticking to my palate, I've become so thirsty from this wild hunt and the heat of the day." Turning towards him, the wicked Hagen spoke, "Forgive me, noble Siegfried lord. I am to blame for your thirst, for by mistake I sent the wine to another place far away from here." This made the hero unhappy, and he cried out in anger, "So you really want to let me die of thirst after I cleared the forest for you? That seems like a poor reward to me. Couldn't a hunter be satisfied with water just this once?" asked Hagen, trying to calm him. "I know of a nearby spring, my lord, with the most excellent water. Let me show it to you." And Siegfried leaped up laughing, and his ill mood vanished suddenly. Let's go," he cried, "take me there." Then Hagen pointed out the spring to him, but grasping Siegfried's sleeve, he held him back, asking for a token of favor. "Would you not agree to show me that you are not angry by running a race with me to that spring? I have never seen your sprinting speed. I would like to compete with you in this art." And gallantly Siegfried answered, "I have often practiced it, and no stag is too swift for me to catch it with my hands in the race. So I will carry shield and sword and spear in the race, while you may run without any burden, so that we may be more evenly matched." The heroes stood side by side, and at Gunther's signal, they raced like the wind, with Siegfried reaching the spring a spear's throw ahead of Hagen. He threw his weapons aside and bent low to quench his thirst at the spring. Now Hagen had also arrived. Quickly, he hid Siegfried's weapons in the bushes, all but the spear. He grabbed it with iron fists, raising it into the air. His single shining eye had seen the red cross that Kriemhild, in her tender concern, had sewn into her lord's tunic, just below the shoulder blades. With terrifying force, Hagen von Tranya struck the hero with the spear, so that it penetrated through his back and chest. The tip of the weapon was visible from the front and the shaft from behind, and blood gushed out from both sides like a torrent from a mountain stream. Siegfried let out a cry that made heaven and earth tremble and even caused the murderer's hands to quiver. "Wretched traitor! Assassin!" echoed through the forest. The dying hero, with his last strength, threw himself at Hagen and threw the stunned man into a pile of rocks, so that Hagen's whole body creaked and the world darkened in his eyes. Siegfried sank into the flowery field, and his loyal blood flowed unceasingly onto the ground. "Kriemhild," he whispered, "my sweet wife, I love you." With a pale face, Gunther and his knights stormed in. "What is going on here?" he called out from afar. "What has happened?" And Siegfried opened his eyes and spoke. "The greatest crime the sun has ever witnessed has been committed. You have allowed for the murder of your most faithful friend, who has done nothing but good to you. But I prophesy to you, my death will be avenged upon you, and it shall bring ruin to you all." He closed his eyes, a sigh still escaped from his lips, calling out the name of Kriemhild, and he faded away from life onto his flowery bed. Siegfried the hero was dead. Suddenly the sun set and dark night covered the earth. A freezing breath went through the forest, so that people and animals shivered, as if spring had fled forever. Then the knights lowered Siegfried's body to his shield which they found in the thicket, and Hagen secretly stole Barmung, Siegfried's sword, for himself, and they all promised to keep the murder a secret. They went out of the forest and crossed the Rhine at night. Silently, they walked with their burden into the castle and, mockingly, Hagen laid the bloody body of the hero on the threshold of Kriemhild's chamber as a mocking greeting from Queen Brunhild. Waking from an ominous dream, Kriemhild rose early before dawn. Quickly she dressed herself. It was as if Siegfried had called out her name in desperate anguish. She wanted to hurry to the cathedral to pray. When she now opened the door of her chamber, she stumbled on her husband's body and fell shrieking to the ground, losing her consciousness. Mime, the loyal blacksmith, had heard the scream. In his iron armor he rushed over and found Kriemhild at the neck of her dead husband with wild eyes. She had awoken yet not in this world. Her screams echoed terribly through the house and across the slumbering city of Worms. Mime stood trembling and wept for a long time for his foster child. Then, he carried the body of Siegfried with Kriemhild into the chamber and washed the body, wrapping it in a white linen shroud. In the hallway, the knights and women gathered with terrified faces. King Gunther arrived with his courtiers and Hagen von Tranya also entered the room. And King Gunther spoke, "An unfortunate accident has occurred, dear sister, for which no one is to blame." Then Kriemhild rose from the body and looked deep into every face. "If you are speaking the truth and are not afraid," she said commandingly, "then let each one approach the body." And they all did so. But when Hagen's turn came, the wounds of the dead opened again and began to bleed. Queen Kriemhild shrieked. "It's him! He is the murderer! Avenge the death of our lord, Mime!" And like a tiger, Mime leapt at Hagen von Tranya and inflicted deep wounds. But Hagen had Siegfried's sword, Barmung, at his belt, and he drew it from its sheath. The sword's steel hissed through Mime's iron armor, taking the life of this loyal man. Mime the smith smiled even in death, admiring the ingenious weapon he had crafted, and he fell still and lifeless at the feet of his beloved Siegfried. For 3 days, Kriemhild sat by the body of her beloved husband, grieving loudly. Then she walked silently behind the coffin to the church. She saw a vision that seemed to her like a prophecy. She saw herself as the wife of a powerful ruler in a distant land, and she saw the Burgundians coming from their homeland to greet her. Then an open hall appeared before her, where a fierce battle was raging, smoke billowing and flames blazing, where death claimed them all, bringing revenge for Siegfried. The priests prayed, the bells rang, and Siegfried's tomb was closed off from human eyes. But Kriemhild stood upright with her hand extended, gazing at the ring of Nibelung, which sparkled on her finger. Strengthening its curse, she added her own to it. "Siegfried's death must be avenged.